We're going to start with the breaking news of fresh evidence emerging of Turkey's apparent support for jihadists in Syria. RT has filmed what appears to be trucks heading from a Turkish border checkpoint to the Syrian town of Azaz, where Nusra Front fighters are said to control parts of the city. One of our correspondents was on the Turkey-Syria border, just meters away from what looked like Nusra Front positions, identified by black flags. TV crews seldom manage to get so close to militant forces in the area. RT's Lizzie Phelan travelled with the Syrian Kurdish forces, the YPG. They're the main anti-ISIL fighters on the ground and have recently been shelled by Turkey from across the border.
We're right next to the Turkish border. Beyond, you can see the Turkish city of Kilis.
The YPG say that al-Nusra have taken down most of their flags because they fear airstrikes since they're excluded from the ceasefire agreement. But we can see three flying here. We're extremely close to al-Nusra positions, not more than 50 meters away from us.
From here we've got an even better view of that al-Nusra flag. I could literally walk there within a minute. Actually see here that important border town of Azaz that Turkey is determined to prevent the YPG from taking. Just a little beyond that, you can see the Bab al-Salam border crossing and a heavy flow of vehicles coming from Turkey into Azaz.
When we zoom in, we can see Turkish military vehicles, probably around a kilometer away, maybe less. And just in front, there's another very small village that the YPG here say al-Nusra uses for training.
Beyond that, we can see the Turkish flag flying. That's the Turkish side of the border. And through there, the YPG says they monitor a regular supply of weapons coming from Turkey to that Nusra camp.
There's been a heavy build-up of Turkish military presence all along the border with this area. Locals say that this area was attacked around 3 weeks ago, and that Turkey actually seized land from Syria. This wall that has been built was new. They say over 1,000 olive trees, which is one of the most important sources of income for people here, were destroyed. And we can see some Turkish military hardware very close to the border, from which the YPG say Turkey has been attacking the city of Afrin itself and surrounding villages.
Ankara strenuously denies supporting extremists, despite numerous reports claiming otherwise. Last May, a Turkish opposition news outlet published a video that it claimed showed Turkish intelligence smuggling weapons to Syria. The journalists responsible for the article were arrested and spent 3 months in jail. Turkish media also reported on Islamic State and other jihadi fighters getting medical treatment in the country's hospitals, something that raised concerns among Turkish MPs.
This photo was taken on the 16th of April 2014 at a state hospital in Hatay. We know the identity of this person. He's an Islamic State commander. Terrorists are being treated in state hospitals. The Health Ministry and the Foreign Ministry need to explain why this is happening. Is there any security on Turkey's national borders?
The Russian Defense Ministry also recently released video evidence showing what it says are trucks smuggling illegal Islamic State oil across the border into Turkey. Ankara has denied any links to the trade. Let's pick this up now with former US diplomat Jim Jatras. Welcome back to RT International. Thanks for coming on the programme. So, trucks heading from Turkey into apparent Nusra territory. Does that surprise you?
No, not at all. And first off, let me commend RT for reporting on this. And I have to ask myself, what is the likelihood that the American and other Western media will point to this as definite evidence of collusion between the Turkish government, President Erdogan, and these terrorists in Syria, in this case, al-Nusra. This is al-Qaeda. How can they pretend to be part of an anti-terrorist effort when it's quite clear that they are very closely supporting these terrorists?
When it comes to, we've had all the denials about supporting terrorists, but the Turkish Prime Minister's also admitted that they do provide support for the moderate rebels. As most people know now, that's a very muddy picture on who is moderate, who is a terrorist, who supports who in that part of the world right now. How can they tell who is moderate and who isn't?
Well, there's a word for this in English. It's called lying. He's simply lying that these are not moderates of any sort. These are jihadists, that they're indistinguishable from al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, with whom they're all mixed up together. They share the same ideology, which is essentially a form of Wahhabism from Saudi Arabia. There are no moderate terrorists in Syria. This is simply more lying from Ankara.
The Turkish PM also stated that they won't let the Syrian town of Azaz fall to Kurdish forces, promising the harshest reaction. What do you think that means? Does this mean all-out war?
I hope it does not, but there's no way of telling with a character as erratic as Erdogan if the Turkish military has any sense of self-interest and, frankly, self-preservation. They better think very long and hard about what their options are before they follow the orders of this madman to send them into Syria and maybe encounter something that they really don't want to see when the Syrian and Russian forces react. Because I can be pretty sure that if the Turks get themselves into trouble in Syria, they better not think about calling the United States or NATO for help.
Although there have been cases in recent months where Turkey has pushed this a little bit. You'd have expected possibly NATO or the United States to try and hold Turkey back on some of its actions, but that hasn't really happened, has it? So they're not going to do anything, are they?
I don't think NATO and the United States can really restrain Turkey because of how erratic Erdogan is. But the flip side of that is, if he goes in and he gets himself into big trouble, I don't think anybody's going to come to his rescue.
But in terms of Turkey being at a NATO frontier, it's at the very end of that. The European Union's worried about the refugees coming through. President Erdogan and Turkey have NATO, Europe and the United States largely over a barrel, don't they?
They certainly have the EU over a barrel on the migrant crisis, but I think there's been enough reported from mostly officials, not necessarily named, but expressing the concerns within the structures of NATO and within the European governments especially, and even within the American government. It's one thing when a NATO member is attacked. It's another thing if one goes into an adventure, aggression of another country, gets into trouble and then says, oh, you have to come help us. I don't think Luxembourg or Greece or other countries are going to want to come to Turkey's rescue there, and this is something that would require unanimity.
Bringing it back to Azaz then, with the trucks that we filmed crossing the border that seem to be supplying Nusra-held territory, the bitterness between the Turks and the Kurds has been going on for decades, but right now, with the Kurds having such a pivotal role in trying to hold back Islamic State, Nusra Front, all those guys in that part of the world, do you expect now, with this kind of evidence, countries like the US to step in and at least do something to stop Ankara shelling the Kurds?
Well, that's the other problem. I think we will bend their ear. We will try to convince them this is not a good idea, but I don't think that will be successful either. We don't know how seriously they will actually try to impact the situation around Azaz and elsewhere along their border, or whether they'll simply go through the motions, try to preserve their pride, because they're looking at endgame on their policy here. If their terrorist assets are destroyed, they've invested a lot in them in the last few years, and if that border is completely closed off by the Syrian army and by the Kurds, those terrorists are finished, and Ankara knows that.
Jim Jatras, I really appreciate your insight into this. Thanks for joining us on RT International.
Thank you.